Hey everyone, it's Coach Robert. I was talking with a friend the other day about how they sometimes get a stalemate when they're checkmating with a queen and a king. So I decided that I would show a trick that, as far as I know, I came up with it, but it's nothing really novel, but it's something that maybe a lot of people don't know about how to avoid the stalemate every time when you do a checkmate with a queen and a king. So first I just want to explain what method people usually use to think about this checkmate. It's one that I like to call the night shadow technique, although it has probably several different names. But night shadow technique sounds cool, so that's what I always use. The reason it's called night shadow technique is that the way you start the sequence to checkmate from any position like this one, where you have a queen and a king and they have only a king, is you first put your queen on a square that's a knight move away from their enemy king. So these are all the squares that are a knight move away. The way you know is if you imagine a knight there, you can see that it would check the king, right? So the next thing is you scan and see which of these the queen could go to. So you can eliminate all the ones the queen can't arrive on, and that shows you that if you put your queen on any of these squares, that's a good way to start the night shadow technique to checkmate with a queen and a king. So we don't have to worry about stalemate until the king's at the edge of the board, because stalemate only happens when you have no moves, and whenever the king is in the middle of the board, there's going to be at least one move that they can play, no matter what you do with your queen and your king. So we can pick whichever one we want. Just to demonstrate the thinking process, I'll show you this one. So queen d7, it's a knight move away, and the reason we put it a knight move away is not just because we feel really fancy when we do knight move shaped things, it's because we build this barrier with the queen. Okay, so this is like a wall the king cannot cross. And this one is not that important in terms of the wall building. Our main goal is to push the king consistently in one direction by doing this over and over again. So we've built this wall. That means the king can only go this way or this way or this way or this way. And if you kind of squint, you can see that they're all going towards not this corner, not this corner. They're all going towards the upper right and the bottom right corners. So eventually the king will end up there if you follow this technique very well. So let's make some random moves for this king. Like let's say they go down towards this corner. The next step is to copy the king. And the reason we're copying the king is that if the king goes like this, and we go like this as well with our queen, we're copying with the queen, not the king. We are going to make a new barrier, forcing the king further in that one direction. So this is a technique that's widely known, so I don't want to linger too much on it. If they go up to the right, you go up to the right. If they go down to the right, you go down to the right. And eventually we reach a situation like this, where the king is going to the corner, and a lot of people will follow this technique to a fault. They'll bring the king all the way to the corner, and this is the part where things get tricky, because if you copy them, you're not going to get what you want. So if you're not sure what's going to happen, you might want to pause here and ask yourself, after the move queen to g3, what will black play? And the answer is nothing, which means it's going to be stalemate, and stalemate's a draw. We don't want that. In some games, if you trap the king like that, they have to go into danger and you win, but chess is not one of those games. So we don't want this. That's a huge mistake. Now they can't go anywhere. So the next part of the technique that everybody's learned about checkmate with a queen and a king is you bring your king over, right? You just come over here, and they have to move back and forth until eventually the kings are face to face, right? There's only one square in between. They might be here, they might be here. It doesn't really matter as long as they're one square away. And the next thing you do is either make a sandwich, which is what I like to call it because that's fun. I like to make a sandwich. Or you can do your checkmate where if this was a rook, it would still be a mate. So you could also go here. These are all checkmates. So this is the technique, but people mess it up a lot. So we're going to focus on that in this lesson today, about how we don't ever mess this up. You could just like practice this over and over again, but I think there's a psychological trick that will benefit you for figuring it out. First, let me show you a few of the stalemates that typically happen. Let's look at this other variation, just to keep things fresh. So if we're copying them, we're eventually going to bring them to the edge of the board, because they can never go towards the center if you keep building a barrier that blocks the way to the center. Okay, so when they play king g8, I think it's especially easy to checkmate. Usually people will play a move like queen e7, and then now if they play queen f7, this is not what we want, right? That's a stalemate, so people bring the king in. So they go like this, and then they make the sandwich. The tricky thing is when black does a very particular maneuver with their king. Now, really, these are all equivalently tricky if you're already good at this, but if you just learned this technique, you might have trouble if they play the move king g7. And the reason for this is that if you're following the technique that you learned, you should be copying the king here, right? So they go to the side, that means you go to the side. So we go here. Now, the reason we do all the copying is to get them stuck on the edge of the board. And they're not stuck on the edge of the board yet. But if they play the move king h8, and we copy them, you might want to think about what happens there. It's stalemate again. So we can't copy them because it's stalemate, but they're also not trapped on the edge. They could go on these two squares. So your copying technique fails in this one instance. And usually what people do is they just kind of shrug and they move on to bring their king closer. For example, they might play king b2. And we'll see king g7, and they'll bring their king closer. And meanwhile, their king's not trapped on the edge. So once you actually get really close, sometimes weird things happen and stalemate just occurs. When you're sitting in the comfort of your home and thinking about this stuff, it's kind of easy to boo-hoo the poor choices that white might make if they play like king f5. But usually people get situations like this in extreme time pressure, especially if they're new. Or if they play bullet chess a lot. So a lot of people might need to know stuff like this just for bullet. Like, how do you do this as quickly as humanly possible with no mistakes? So if you play king f5 and they play king g7, it's hard to like get your pieces closer. It's very, very easy to stalemate. In fact, like here's one obvious move. You might play like queen g6, and after king f8, you want to bring your king closer, so you play a move like king f6, and guess what? That's stalemate again. So basically, any time the technique that people learn is derailed, it's really easy to stalemate. And here's another example. So let's say you play king f6, which is better, and they play king h7. Now we can't really bring our pieces into the configuration that we want if we just follow the rules outlined. So people start making random moves here. So after king f7, king g6, again, it's a stalemate. You see how it's like kind of easy to stalemate in various ways here. So if you're a bullet player, I think that playing king g7 instead of king g8 or some more resistant move like king e8 is actually exploitative. People who don't know this trick that I'm going to tell you are very likely to stalemate when they get derailed once you're in the corner but not trapped on the edge. So here's how we circumvent this. Going back to the move queen e6, this is not bad because it's forcing them at least to go onto the corner for one move. Here's the thing that you can remember. You don't have to even calculate to use this. There are a few squares on the board where if you put your queen there, you will never ever get a stalemate. So imagine this, like your queen's on any of these and their king is anywhere on the edge. So maybe I'll highlight those squares too. Well, of course, the king won't be in check, so I'll remove the ones where they would be in check if your queen was close by. So it would be these corners. Now, if your queen's on one of these green highlighted squares, and the king is on one of these yellow, orangey colored squares, and trapped by the queen, they will always have at least two places to go. Like if we play queen e7, they can play the move king g8 and then king h8 over and over again, but not king h7. So they're trapped on just one edge of the board, and stalemate will definitely not occur at this point. Or even if the king is on like h1 and your queen is on e2 or g4, they will always have at least two squares, and at this point you can safely bring your king close. And you don't have to do any tricky maneuvering with the queen after this. Once your queen reaches one of these green squares, you'll only have to play one queen move, and it will be the checkmating move. So let's see one example. Let's say it's queen e7. You could even do queen d7, it doesn't matter. So let's actually see, just for sake of argument, queen d7, because this doesn't look like the kind of move that you would say is like immediately winning and easy to win, but it really is. They're trapped on these three squares, so they're going to start moving. Now the next thing, if you learn this technique, is you bring your king closer, and it doesn't matter where they go. So even though they have a lot of room, and a lot of room means no stalemate, you are always going to reach a position, no matter what they play, like here or here, you're going to be able to make a sandwich on the next move and give the checkmate. Like they go here. If this is tricky, you can pause here and try to solve it. There's actually multiple checkmates here. I like to try to find all of them. Not during a game, of course. But here's the sandwich making move. Here's another checkmate. Here's another checkmate. If they go here, we only have one checkmate in one move, which is queen g7, this diagonal sandwich. Okay, so the crux of the technique here is that first you need to know this knight shadow technique that's popularly taught. So you probably already know it if you're watching this video. And if you don't, you can practice that against yourself or a computer or a friend. But if you find yourself stalemating a lot, remember that in a position like this, where the king's anywhere on the edge, if you put your queen on one of these highlighted squares in green, you are not going to get a stalemate if you just trap the king on the edge and bring your king close to the king. At that point, all you have to do is make the sandwich. Okay, well, I hope you liked that video and that this is helpful for you. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and message me in the comments section if you have any questions or concerns. Take care, everyone.